That type of coincidence can simply be described as not a coincidence. And yet those matched the distances given in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But he had a PhD at Harvard in mathematics and probability. So he knew what he was talking about, he knew his field, and it's okay, he has his critics, I'll be fair.
But Vedic astronomy, when did it started? How years back or date it goes back?
The Vedic culture, it predates the Europeans by far, but it's not contradictory to modern science, or more importantly, it's not naive about modern science. It's complementary, and if there's any of those theories which are incorrect, or found to be incorrect in the future, then anything after that would change. The house of cards would come down.
So tell us, what is fifth canto of Mahabhagavatam?
The Bhagavad Purana is understood by the tradition I belong to be the cream of the Vedas, the creme de la creme, the fifth canto, which is basically the creative impetus. It's about the structure of the universe, it's about the nature of the universe.
Can you relate which parts or which aspects of any literature, whether it's Mahabhagavatam, Vedas or Puranas, where it sort of references anything where the interpretation can be made through the quantum theory?
It seemed to reflect, to a greater degree, a universe which appears to be multidimensional. Although quantum mechanics has a very atheistic nature behind it, you can conclude that the Vedas have something there. So Lord Brahma has this vision of many other Lord Brahmas offering their respects to Lord Krishna. The point is that even Lord Brahma, is the creator or the designer, the architect of this universe, didn't know about the other ones.
Shri Radha Mohan ji, welcome to Soul Sync.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm not too bad, thank you.
You wear multiple hats, and as a senior personnel of Bhakti Vedanta Manor Temple or Krishna Consciousness Movement, as I said, you may wear multiple hats, right from the communications to the drama, and also on the Vedic science, the expertise that you carry. So today I want to dive deep into Vedic science, and specific to Vedic science, I want to look at Vedic astronomy versus modern astronomy. Nicholas Copernicus was actually the one who felt that there is the world outside this universe, established something like that in 16th century. But Vedic astronomy, when did it started, and what relevance and what facts does it provide today, right from the time it's actually been written by ancient Sanatana scholars? How years back or date it goes back, the Vedic astronomy?
All right, okay, so obviously you just mentioned, for example, a European astronomer. So it's all part of that Renaissance, that movement where rediscovering itself. You had, imagine, the collapse of the Roman Empire, then you had what we call the Dark Ages, and then the medieval period. Then you've got the Renaissance, where you've got this resurgence of science and the exploration of the world around us. But that's all very European-centric. But if you turn to the Vedas, for example, the Vedic culture, it predates the Europeans by far. Even though the perspective is very different in the context of storytelling, or the approach may seem very alien or even mythological to a European reader. But beneath that, the ingredients hidden within are extremely deep, actually extremely scientific, but represents a different way of looking at the universe. You've only have to turn to, for example, I think it's 12th century Bhaskaracharya, who was writing commentaries on the Surya Siddhanta in the supplementary work, the Siddhanta Shriyamani, for example, and then of course Aryabhata, I think was the 4th or the 5th century, very, very well-known person. But the point here, I think, in terms of how far it goes back, I mean, you've got the Jyotish Shastras, but then specifically within that corpus, which of course concentrates on astrology as well. But astronomy can be addressed in the Siddhantic traditions. For example, you've got the script of the Surya Siddhanta. And in terms of dating that, I mean, I think they do say that it could go back as far as 1500 BCE. And also challenging to some is that the scriptural tradition itself talks about time much further back, almost inconceivably further back than that. The opening lines to the Surya Siddhanta, which means the scripture of the solar system or the sun, it just says, oh, this goes back to the time of the Satyug. And that means millions of years ago. And it was said to have been spoken between the chariot of the sun god and Maya Danava. This is what the claim is in the beginning of Surya Siddhanta. So we're talking about something which is not even on this planet. But this is quite typical of the Vedic tradition, where the idea, the basic concept is, whether it's a Surya Siddhanta or whether it's the Bhagavad Purana's 5th canto, which is also about Vedic cosmology, it's all about trying the idea of passing information from a higher being to a lower being. So they call that descending knowledge, where you have a higher authority or someone that's been in existence since antiquity. And whereas what the Europeans did was well, I suppose you called ascending knowledge, where you have a great scholar, a thinker, and then looks at the world around him with his senses, whether it's Copernicus or whether it was Newton, whoever it might be, looked at the world around him and said, I think it's like this. The Vedic approach is a bit different because it's mixed with spirituality and more subtle dimensions, as it were.
What is Surya Siddhanta? Who wrote it? Do you have any dates that you can share? And why that the focus was on the astronomy?
So from a historical point of view, I just wanted to work backwards.
Yeah.
For example, in the Surya Siddhanta is a fascinating scripture in the sense that it's not spiritual, although it's coming from a spiritual kind of cultural foundation. The world view is ultimately spiritual, but in itself, it's very mathematical. It's, to understand or to translate the Surya Siddhanta, you have to be expert in trigonometry, for example. But you have, for example, Bengali translations from Sanskrit. But from a historical point of view, many people would say, well, Bhaskara presented the Surya Siddhanta, but he himself would go, he would himself go back to the disciples of Aryabhata, which of course is another 500 or 600 years before him. And they themselves were saying that they addressed this scripture, but even then it existed before a form of palm leaves. So what it is, it's like an evolving tradition of a mixture between the spoken word, palm leaves, and then of course historical scholars, if you like, or those who have made a significant contribution to Vedic astrology, and of course but more formalized into the dividing into chapters as we would recognize today. So from an historical point of view, the Surya Siddhanta is, you would say, well, some people believe, we're talking about between 1000 BCE and 1500 BCE. And even then, though, the scholars would say, no, this has been passed on by word of mouth. And this is something which is, again, a characteristic of the Vedic culture, where the Puranas, for example, Western scholars would turn to the Puranas or indeed the Siddhantas and say, oh, well, this was written down during a certain period. There's no evidence of anything written before that. Therefore, we're going to date it then.
Even that date...
after the so-called Aryan invasion theory, which is a theory I dispute. But the point is here is that they would go back to that point. However, the Vedic position is a bit different, where before things were put into writing, there was a whole tradition between gurus and disciples or various teachers that would actually be passing on traditions by word of mouth.
Thanks for elaborating on that. Whether it's Vedic astronomy or Western astronomy, all the scholars who claim to be writing this solar system, the way it functions, it's all based on their assumption and based on their theory of mathematics or trigonometry, etc. Right? So if we need to relate these two, like modern astronomy is well accepted across the globe, but the Vedic astronomy isn't. That's the fact. Vedic astronomy is accepted maybe within the Sanatana Dharma. But you're saying that the Vedic astronomy, and we all know that it goes back way, millions of years, if not billions, before actually the modern astronomy came into the existence. So how do you correlate this? So share us some theories where the Vedic astronomy, which is mentioned so far back in the time, is still relevant even today, and the modern astronomy is sort of catching up. I'm not drawing any comparison, but I want you to explain what that means.
First of all, we have to understand that the modern system of astronomy is, as I say, based on ascending knowledge, and that has a part to play in it. When you look around at the elements around you, which are accessible by your senses, And you're able to, especially, for example, in the medical field or various scientific fields, they're able to achieve things. And that's why that's become the predominant narrative, because we can see, oh, we've created this, we've created that, and our lives, our physical lives are perhaps a little bit better than things were, at least from a European perspective. The Vedic, of course, has a very different approach and comes from time of yore, but it's not that one is superior or better than the other, and that's my main narrative and what I try to address in my YouTube channel. I try to explore the interface between modern astronomy and Vedic cosmology, to find out if there's any marriage between the two, any correlation, even though the approaches are so different. The contemporary narrative, the predominant global one, of course, is that of what we call modern science, or specifically astronomy. But before we understand that, we have to dig still deeper. For example, we need context, don't we? We need context. Like when you're dealing with the flaws or the challenges in ascending process, although they have benefits, is that when you're talking about things well beyond the Earth, well beyond the solar system, well beyond the galaxy, obviously these things are going to change. Like it wasn't until I think it was the early 1920s when they kind of concluded there was more than one galaxy. Before that, before 1920, 21, that period, the general belief is what we now call the Milky Way galaxy. That was the universe. And everything else was just some vague spots in the sky they didn't quite understand, and they turned out to be galaxies. So now, you imagine 100 years from now, the theories, the size of the universe, the nature of the universe, even the multidimensional realities of the universe, or the quantumness of it all, maybe those theories may be different to now. The Vedic approach is a bit different because they are not claiming change. The approach is ascending knowledge, which means great beings, Narad Muni or Lord Brahma, will pass these information on to mankind through various spiritual teachers and lineages. And the idea is not to change it. The philosophy is a bit different. Now, here's the thing. Both have their benefits and both, you could say, have their challenges. But the real challenge in all of this, and it's very exciting, is when you, just like the Bhaktivedanta Institute, that was set up by Srila Prabhupada to explore the things in common, if you like, between, let's say, modern science and Vedic science. So that's what I try to do in my channel. I try to say, okay, let's use the approach that we have and the knowledge we have and see what happens if you don't kind of confront them with an aggressive or negative attitude towards any of them, but you say, okay, this is right, this is good work here, but how can we add to both narratives?
I want to summarize the approach that you just mentioned on the Vedic astronomy. You said the Vedic astronomy is not changeable, it's fixed sort of a thing, and it's fixed through the demigods. Like you said, the Brahma and the various other demigods within the Sanatana Dharma, which basically a reflection of the universe. And each god or each demigod doesn't actually owns or understands the entire cosmology, but they only understand the relevance of their own galaxy or their own territory, so to say. Is that summarization right?
You are right in the sense that there's a pastime with Lord Brahma who tries to do a little trick on Krishna by taking his cowherd friends away and hiding them somewhere. But Krishna actually basically does a trick on Lord Brahma to kind of show that he's more powerful, if you like. Anyway, I'll skip through the details. But in the end, of course, Krishna says to Lord Brahma, anyway, you're just the creator of this universe. And but there are others. And Lord Brahma says, others? What do you mean other universes? He says, well, there are many others. And then Lord Brahma has this vision of many other Lord Brahmas offering their respects to Lord Krishna, and who looks much larger Lord Brahmas from much larger universes. So even the point is that even Lord Brahma, who's much, is the creator or the designer, the architect of this universe, didn't know about the other ones. What to speak of us? And the idea, you see, is that if Lord Brahma, if he didn't know what was going on, as it were, outside of his domain, how could we as human beings? But this is the magic of the Vedas and the Puranas, is that we are given an outline, not in detail, but a basis of the universe, but in a way that we can understand. It is said that, for example, the Bhagavad Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, is divided into 12 traditional cantos. which the fifth canto is greatest interest to me because that's the astrology bit, which I'll get into in a minute, astronomy rather. But it is said that in higher worlds, in higher realities and the demigods, they have many more cantos. They have the same thing but in much more detail. But what we're given is the ABC of what we need to know. And that takes a lot of faith. And faith is something which you can't just take things just on faith, and therefore there is the need for devotees such as myself and many others to try to find that interface, to try to build your faith, but build it on a strong foundation of our senses as well. If we can achieve that, we can achieve a lot. But just remember, when you're dealing with anything really which is billions of light years away, that takes a faith in itself. That takes a faith in the contemporary theories. You know, theories upon theories upon theories. And if there's any of those theories which are incorrect or found to be incorrect in the future, then anything after that would change. You know, the house of cards would come down. And the point is that if you turn to the fifth canto of the Bhagavad Purana,
I want to get there.
Yeah.
So tell us, what is fifth cantos of Mahabhagavatam? Tell us what it. Let's do it in two ways. One, really high level, put a framework that what it says, and then we'll dive deep into it.
Summarize the Bhagavatam as an entity, summarize the fifth canto, and then we'll dig deeper.
Yeah.
So the Srimad Bhagavatam, otherwise known as the Bhagavad Purana, is understood by the tradition I belong to be the cream of the Vedas, the creme de la creme. You know, of course you've got the four Vedas, but then you've got the Vedanta Sutras, for example, and then the cream of the Vedanta Sutras, of course, is the Srimad Bhagavatam. So if you've got everything in there, summarized, but it's there. Ramayana, Mahabharata is mentioned, many other pastimes, and you will find actually in other Puranas. But the Bhagavatam is said to be, the highest, is understood to be amongst the highest. And within that, placed almost in the middle, is the fifth canto, what we call the fifth canto, which is basically the creative impetus. It's about the structure of the universe. It's about the nature of the universe. And that is a book which I really found fascinating. And I wanted to understand with my physical mind what was going on. And I couldn't understand it. There was a lot of references in there. In it, I found it very strange. And so I turned to the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which of course was an institute created by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, to perhaps address these type of mindsets, these different type of this polarization between science and spiritual science. And one of the very important member of the Bhaktivedanta Institute at the time was Dr. Richard Thompson, or Sadaputa Das was his initiated name. And he looked at these things and very, very deeply, spent many, many years working on these things. So I started studying his books. And one of my favorites basically was looking at the one chapter which describes concentric circles in space, which are millions of miles in size, with different planets and different oceans. What he did was he discovered, remember that this was only in the maybe from sometime after the Second World War, where the size and scale of the solar system roughly hasn't changed much since then, because therefore we can assume that it's correct, roughly, in terms of the relative distances between the planets, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, etc. So it's relatively recent knowledge when compared with the age of the Puranas. Yet he saw that encoded within the fifth canto was the solar system from a geocentric point of view, which matches the system which they used in those days, an Earth-centered, relative Earth-centered point of view. When you look at the movements of the planets from Earth's point of view, they go towards the Earth and go away from the Earth in cycles, epicycle. And yet those matched the distances given in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it couldn't be coincidental. Remember that he had a PhD at Harvard in mathematics and probability. So he knew what he was talking about, he knew his field, and okay, he has his critics, I'll be fair. But by and large, that type of coincidence can simply be described as not a coincidence. It's almost as if encoded within, since time immemorial, before the time of Aryabhata and so on and so forth, you had this knowledge, which is not entirely contradictory to the Surya Siddhanta interest, although Purana is a very different type of mood. Knowledge of modern astronomy before the Europeans. And this is fascinating stuff. And yet the context of it is very different. The gods and the fact that there's various planets that are inhabited can almost put off the scientific mind. And yet encoded within, as I mentioned, was the dimensions of the solar system as we would recognise today. And there are many things like this which appear to be mythological to begin with, but when you dig deep, there's some serious science there which is actually not only agree with modern science,
So, certainly.
but it goes beyond it.
The person who read the 5th cantos of Mahabhagavatam observed the literature, the things in that, and actually went on to do the study on that and basically put a stamp saying that, yes, what is written there is exactly what the modern astronomy states.
And he was a disciple of Bhaktivinoda Swami Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON. But I would say this, he was a scholar in the real sense. In other words, real scholars don't necessarily put their stamp on and say this is fact. What they do is they present the argument and say, well, with the conclusion and so forth, and say, look, do the maths, as it were, present it, look at it, draw comparisons and so forth, and even have what they call a control mechanism where they show variations. In other words, if it's not true, then this would happen. And then conclude, well, this correlates. And then, of course, at the end of the day, the reader can make up their own mind. But to me, I was convinced by that he was able to unpack large parts of the 5th canto of the Mahapurana, or the Bhagavatam, and say, look, in it, yes, it's very different. It's a different world that's presented to us. But it's not contradictory to modern science, or more importantly, it's not naive about modern science.
It's complementing.
It's complementary. And this is the interface I was talking about, in the sense that, but it goes further, because it puts in a different context, which is much more further out.
That's exactly where I want to go. So the modern science is evolving too. Vedic science or Vedic astronomy is already there. It's written. It's only that the interpretation of it is more clearer as we are going older. We are learning more about it. So what does Vedic astronomy says in the future, what's going to happen with the universe? Is any references there which modern science might not even catch up at that point still, but it will hopefully soon?
I think, for example, I can think of is quantum mechanics, where even if you were to, again, talk about the changing process of ascending knowledge, where if you went to, say, Einstein, for example, when he was a young man, and started presenting quantum to him, he would be unfamiliar with him. Even when he was older, when he was looking at the works of Bohr and other kind of, as you say, patrons, if you like, of the quantum theory. It was bewildering for someone who was ultimately accustomed to dealing with particle physics, looking at things in quite a physical way. Quantum was coming from quite a very different angle altogether, including you can't have quantum without a conscious observer. So it's a very different way of looking at the universe. Then you have other concepts as well, for example, the Mahavishnu breathing out innumerable universes. Again, quantum mechanics, or some of them anyway, do talk about the possibility of innumerable quantum universes. And yet, perhaps put in a way that perhaps the modern mind cannot always appreciate, but yet it's already there. The Mahavishnu breathing in and out innumerable universes, the concepts of great yogis being able to go into, let's say, somewhere in the Himalayas and come out on another side of the world, and all these things which are common things which appear all the time actually in the Puranas, are almost like they seem to reflect to a greater degree a universe which appears to be multidimensional. Although quantum mechanics has a very atheistic nature behind it, it does throw into the ring a kind of a sense of open-mindedness, I think, amongst those who study it, to say, well, actually, you can conclude the Vedas have something there. So in terms of the future, the Vedas will always stay the same, and that's the point, really. They're going to stay the same. You can't rewrite the Bhagavad Purana. It is what it is. The Sanskrit is there. You can purport it differently, depending on the lineage or the sampradaya or the guru may have different angles and use different modern examples. So that's not going to change, but modern science will change. In fact, it's changing all the time when it comes to astrophysics, or when it comes to the macrocosmic world and even the microcosmic world. New theories to accommodate new discoveries. I personally think that quantum, although it's not what people talk about all the time, but quantum theory is a huge thing when you unpack it. But that itself, what I would suggest is, if I had to naively predict that future, even quote Einstein actually, where he looked at quantum mechanics in his latter years, and he admitted, I don't fully, it's true, the figures add up. The experiments come true, and therefore there's something in this. He says, but it's not complete. He said, one thing, whatever, even though there were younger scientists that were looking into this more than him, he concluded that yes, it works. Goodness me. But he said he doesn't think it's complete. There's more to go. And he was admitting to the fact that we don't know everything.
Yes, the Vedas, Mahabhagavatam, everything that's written will stay as is. That's not going to be changed. But there is, again, I'm talking from the people who probably will perceive this in a different way. They'll say that it's written, but everyone is interpreting it in their own way. So now, if I have to paint a picture, we have all these demigods, and let's say Brahma, and you could give an example where Krishna said, Brahma, don't think that you are the only universe that exists. There are multiple Brahmas out there, and I am the one who create all of that. I am the ultimate, right? And this is an interpretation of what is written there. And the same interpretation, you can put it on the cosmic world, where we are saying that it's not just Milky Way galaxy, but there are multiple, many galaxies out there.
Yes.
So that's the interpretation that we made. But the same interpretation can be made for the same stance or the scripture that's written with something else in life.
First of all, Hinduism, basics of Hinduism, the foundation of Hinduism is Sanatana Dharma, which is not one particular, not a single sampradaya, not a single tradition, but an entire culture. So what we call Hinduism is an umbrella, really, of many different schools of thought. And as you said, those are what we call sampradayas, traditions of guru-disciple sampradayas, the Madhva Sampradaya, or the Brahma Madhva Sampradaya, there's the Rudra Sampradaya, and so on, as the Sri Sampradaya and the Rudra Sampradaya. So different to what we call bona fide sampradayas, which go further back than the others. And each one has a slightly different angle of things, but are all regarded within ISKCON as being bona fide, in the sense that there's depth to it. But there are also within what we call the great, there are so many scholars as well that do not, in our view, exist in a bona fide sampradaya or guru. They've come on their own. They're applying the ascending process to Hinduism, basically. And there's many people, it's a very large, complex culture, where they would approach the scriptures directly. And maybe they're part of a relatively short tradition, but doesn't categorize as a sampradaya per se. And they come up with a conclusion which is different. Like you said, for example, I've heard all kinds of things. The main demarcation, I believe, within the Dharmic perspectives is the difference between Advaita and Dvaita philosophies. What I mean by that is that the sense that the belief that everything is one, and therefore, and many of the gods are symbolic, etc. And you get other schools of thought, for example, the one I belong to, would say, no, the universe is basically populated by beings, superior beings, we call gods, demigods, devatas, and that, there's a soul, the soul's individual, there's a super soul, which is God, but the individual souls are there, and we do not merge into this sense of oneness, but actually we always have our individual identity. And people, however, who are part of schools that believe it's all the impersonal Brahman, look at Krishna Leela in a very different way. They would see Krishna, for example, who would dance in the rasa dance in the dead of night with the gopis, is understood by Vaishnavas, of course, as there is some kind of historical placement to it in the realm of Vrindavan, where it happened. Transcendental, not necessarily always physical, but it happened in a literal way. Whereas others would say, oh, it's all symbolic. There was no, the Bhagavad Gita, there was no battle, etc. It's all symbolic of the mind, or Krishna Leela is symbolic of this, and that, the other, and this represents an atom, or this. They try to blend it like this, but that's not the school of thought I belong to. So therefore, we believe, as far as we're concerned, that we look at similar sampradayas. Usually the Madhva Sampradaya is quite good. We're a branch of a branch, actually, of the Madhva Sampradaya. Those within the Brahma Madhva Sampradaya have similar cosmology. Hinduism is very, very broad, very, very complex. And even scholars, including Western scholars, have commented on the Bhagavad Gita. And and have had slightly different conclusions. But when you're trying to find the truth, we believe you have to be part of a bona fide tradition.
You mentioned about quantum theory. Can you relate which parts or which aspects of any literature, whether it's Mahabhagavatam, Vedas, or Puranas, where it sort of references anything where the interpretation can be made through the quantum theory? Quantum theory is all about physical aspects, smallest molecule, etc. So, can you relate anything?
When you look at the Vaishnava teachings, that everything that's alive is a conscious entity. There's a soul inside the plant, the trees, the animals, and so forth. Humans, obviously. And if you take the consciousness or the soul away, you have a dead body. But it's the consciousness, the spark, the jiva, the Atman, which is what's bringing everything to life in the universe. In other words, according to the creation that we read about in the Bhagavad Purana and Mahabhagavatam, we read that nothing really existed without all the souls like us coming in and getting ourselves involved, the law of karma, and exploring the universe and taking different births and so forth. But you take the souls away and there is no universe. So the universe is here to accommodate consciousness. If there's no spiritual consciousness, there is no universe. It's not the other way around, which like you might have in a Darwin theory or evolutionary theory, or neo-Darwinism, where they would say, well, consciousness evolved. It's for us, it's the other way around. But quantum mechanics does at least place the role of consciousness quite central to reality. And I believe that is the interesting area. Just for those who are not too familiar with that, for example, there were Schrödinger's cat, the idea of you put a cat in a box and there's no way of knowing whether there's set up circumstances where, let's say, for 15 minutes later, there's exactly 50% chance the cat will be dead, or the 50% chance the cat will be alive. And you could set that up on a kind of an atomic level to where the one, it creates a poison or it doesn't create a poison for the cat. But you don't know, after those 15 minutes, when you open that box, from your point of view, there's an exact 50% chance the cat will be alive, or 50% it will be dead. But you, as a conscious observer, don't know that yet. And in quantum mechanics, the decision is made by the observer, and in other words, the universe hasn't made up his mind yet until the box is open and the fate of the cat has been revealed. But in other words, you're in that kind of sense of you need a conscious observer for the universe to decide what's actually going on in terms of karma or action.
I want to dwell deep into two things there. One, on the quantum theory side, I think it sort of relates to what the Sanatana principles or Sanatana practitioners believe in it. Like the Brahman, the smallest particle, also have the power, which also quantum theory says, right? Now, going back to the analogy that you drawn on the cat, the scholars, especially in the world of modern psychology, says that the universe or the world that you see is your consciousness. It's quite deep, because for a cat, what a cat sees is the world and the universe. And they drawn this analogy right all the way up to what we know today is a galaxy, or multiple galaxies, universe, cosmic world. They say it's your imagination. So me and you sitting here will see this universe differently. And if I'm a scholar, I'll write my perspective, and that becomes theoretical imagination of what the universe is. So the psychologist says it's not what you are seeing, it's not what I am seeing, it's completely could be different. Yeah. Because for an ant, the universe could be just that area. For a big cat like tiger, it could be that jungle.
Slightly larger, yeah.
And it could be a bit more than that. So it's envisioning your consciousness, how far you go.
Our jungle, our territory is the earth.
So does it have any references of this sort in the Vedic astronomy?
I would say very much so. In fact, I'm really glad you brought that up. You see, the whole point of the Vedas is we were talking about descending knowledge. The idea that there are higher beings, there's something superior to mankind that's in the universe. We can't see them. But then again, can an ant see us? In other words, we may appear to be like a lower animal, let's say, or compared with them. So it's relative. We may not be aware of higher beings in the universe.
It could be one of a planet. For ant, if it has got the consciousness and the mind to think, which I believe it must, it might think that, there are bigger entities in this universe where each human being is basically is a planet for me, because in this size, if you compare, we probably are pretty much the same.
Well, moreover, okay, let's use the ant analogy, because they're kind of small compared to others.
Yeah.
What does an ant do? I mean, we can watch David Attenborough and wildlife programs, and so what an ant is doing is following its senses. It's working as a team with the other ants, and it's trying to survive, it's trying to reproduce, it's trying to defend its nest or whatever, and eating. Eating, sleeping, mating, defending its territory. All animals do that. And the animals, what they do is they you know, I mean, they really, I mean, whether they question their existence or not is something for another time. But the point is, especially when you work your way lower down in the species, where there's no much, that they can't interact with us, we can't communicate with, let's say, for example, a very, very small microscopic entity, because it simply doesn't have the senses. It's not designed to. It can't. We can't have a chat with it. We can't have a chat with a tiny little bug. And its knowledge of our existence may be relative to it, only relevant for its survival. It's just thinking about that. It has very little comprehension of our world. Similarly, you imagine that we are the bird brains, if you like, of the universe, where we may be like insects to a higher being. At the same time, what the Vedas say, and therefore, of course, how can we judge what's happening at the other side of the galaxy? We can only look through our eyes, what we hear, what we see, and the probes that are sent out to, let's say, Mars or Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 that have gone beyond the solar system. These things are really only extensions of our senses, in a sense. Yes, they're probably more sensitive, you know, they can pick up ultraviolet rays or whatever it is, I don't know. So they can do things we can't. But ultimately, they're looking at the universe from a physical point of view. But the Vedas, they would say, well, the elements that constitute this universe isn't just earth, water, fire, air, you know, which is what our senses detect, but rather there's subtle elements as well, which is, you know, you've got ether, and then you've got mind, intelligence, and ego, which themselves sound abstract to us, but there are beings in the Vedas where their bodies are made of mind, or their bodies are made of intelligence. It said that Lord Brahma's body is made of intelligence. You know, Lord Brahma's body is not made of earth or water, otherwise we would see him, and he'd be much more limited. But we have this sense that there are beings in the universe which have higher existence. Their bodies are more subtle than ours. Their bodies are made of mind, intelligence, ego, and they create us out of what's below them. Just like in a laboratory, you may have someone who is trying to create life by mixing two substances together, or by you know, playing around with things in their environment, and say, oh, I just created this, or now we can do that. Fine, okay. Could we just be, the humankind almost be like a scientific experiment of something which is beyond our senses? And the thing is this, I used to think like that as a kid, but the thing is that when you bring the Vedas into it, what happens is you get these far out concepts. You get things which, you know, even quantum friendly, let's say, but you also get meaning and purpose, which is what a lot of religious traditions do. They say there's some far out things, and they call them angels or archangels or cherubim or cherubim, you know, within the Christian tradition, for example. And the ongoing theme is there's something out there that we don't quite understand, which is beyond, this is the key, beyond the realm of modern science, beyond our senses, you see. And this is the ongoing theme. Now, as science progresses, or so-called progresses, it may be that they'll understand more and more about the soul. Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, he did actually say that there's not enough scientific departments looking at things like this, like, you know, things like out-of-body experiences, for example, and these type of things, which are done. Things which are, you know, concepts of ghosts, for example, or astral bodies, all these things, or life after death, you know, evidence of reincarnation, where young children have been interviewed in India and they talk in detail about their previous life, which corresponds. You know, that kind. And the thing is, that's science, but it's not called science. It's not mainstream. It usually finds its way at the top of a magazine like Nexus, or, you know, it never finds its way into the New Scientist magazine, or onto, let's say, the BBC News or whatever. because knowing this extra things, and if there's enough people believe these things, it may be a threat, if you like, to this foundation of society which we take for granted. And people can't make that step. People are afraid of it. But devotees and practitioners of Dharma, in whatever form, I think are not afraid to address these different realities.
This is really fascinating discussion that we had, and I think it's going to be path-breaking, because religion or practitioners of religion like you, Sanatana Dharma practitioners, it's always been like labeled as if they have a traditional approach, but it's a path-breaking because it's not just in the religious way, but also on the science, on the astronomy side, where things are like, aligning with the Western and, so to say, modern astronomy. So this is going to be really helpful. Before we close, just want to quickly do a rapid fire. What are the key principles of ISKCON?
Key principle of ISKCON is to love the Supreme Personality of Godhead that we call Krishna. The chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, as propagated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
What is the biggest misconception that people have about ISKCON related to Vedic science?
Lots of people may not realize exactly how scientific it really is, whether it's a spiritual science, as in helping people with yoga and meditation, which is a science in itself, but even in the kind of the science like in astronomy, most people don't know much about that.
Difference between Vedic and modern astronomy?
In a very few words, modern astronomy is ascending knowledge, where you have people on the earth looking up at the world around them and, based on their senses, trying to understand the universe from a physical point of view. The tradition of Vedic believes, of course, the idea, the preconception that there are higher beings that are passing down knowledge to us, to humankind, through the descending process.
After this conversation, if I have to pick a book, which book you recommend for the Vedic astronomy?
I would recommend, obviously I'm always going to recommend the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, but I think for this, I would Mysteries of the Sacred Universe by Sadaputa Das, aka Richard Thompson.
Great. Thank you so much, Radhaji. It was a pleasure talking to you.